Welcome back to another episode of Redeemed Resistance. We got a response video going here today. We're going to be responding to a sermon that was given by Pastor or Reverend Brandon Robertson. He is a progressive pastor and theologian. He is very popular, very commonly known in the Christian community on both sides. Progressive Christians and conservative Christians both know who he is. We're not going to waste any more time. We're going to get into this video and respond to some of the claims he's making. I'm going to play a video and I'll be responding to it and pausing it as we go through. So let's get right into it.
The resurrection of Christ is a bit weird for me. How do you feel about this part of the Christian gospel, and how important is it to the Christian faith? Does anybody else feel like the resurrection's a little bit weird sometimes? Yeah, a couple of you? Thanks for admitting it. It's an interesting story, right? We don't see people rise from the dead every day, which is what makes the resurrection such a compelling part of the Christian story. If I'm honest, I've struggled with understanding what this resurrection narrative actually means as well. In our modern scientific era, it's really easy for us to say, we know people don't rise from the dead, so maybe we won't take that literally.
Real quick on this, the Bible does not come under the authority of science. It is the other way around. Science comes under the authority of the Bible. As Christians, the Bible is the lens that we look upon the world. That is where we get our world view from. It is the infallible, inerrant, inspired word of God. So it does not come under the authority of science. Science can very easily be wrong. Science has been wrong on multiple occasions. So again, the Bible does not come under the authority of science.
There's lots of people that would say that. In other words, we look at that part of the text and we say, perhaps there's something more going on here. Perhaps it's a metaphor. Perhaps it's something other than literal truth.
Very commonly in progressive theology in churches and in their preaching, they often allegorize many different narrative texts. We're also going to see that later on in this video as well. And the resurrection of Christ has been something that has been just simply turned into a metaphor. It meant something else. It represented something else. I don't think that is Brandon's position that he is going to put forth here today, but that is a very common view among progressive Christians. So he's still leaving that door open. Oh, you can think that it's a metaphor because we just don't know. It might be literal, it might not be, but we'll go on and see what he says about the resurrection.
And there's something important that I want to say here, that the way that the Bible is meant to be looked at most of the time, in a lot of the stories of Scripture, is in a metaphorical lens. The writers of the Hebrew Bible.
That is not true. So we interpret the Bible based off of the genres of the books themselves and also how the authors intended for those books that they wrote to be interpreted. For example, Psalms, we would expect to see a lot of metaphors in there and even some allegory. However, in a narrative account, like the gospel accounts that we're talking about, the resurrection of Jesus, those authors would have intended for us to interpret those literally because they are writing narrative story.
The rabbis, if you read back in the rabbinical tradition, they weren't seeking to write historical accounts of what really happened, but they were taking bits of history and adding narrative to it to communicate deeper spiritual truths. And so we have things in the Bible like the story of Jonah.
That is simply just a progressive teaching.
In a whale for 3 days.
The Bible does not say Jonah was in the belly of a whale. Jonah chapter 1 says it was a great fish that was appointed to swallow Jonah. And then later on in Matthew, Jesus says that a sea monster, that is what the word translates to, that Jesus uses, a sea monster swallows Jonah. I've seen people also make the connection and the argument that it was the Leviathan that swallowed Jonah, but I digress. That is besides the point. Let's keep going.
Don't throw anything at me, but that probably didn't historically happen. But that's not the point. The point of that story for the Hebrew people was never, did a guy really survive in a whale's stomach for 3 days? It's, what is God communicating through this story? A phrase that served me well in reading the Bible is this: it doesn't have to be factually true to be actually true.
Real quick, when Jesus brings up Jonah, he interprets that as literally. When he's recounting the story, he says, just as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the belly of the earth for 3 days. And then he rises again, just as Jonah was spit up on the beach. But something very common among progressive Christian scholars, they teach that Jonah was an allegory, that it was not narrative, it was not historically accurate. It did not actually happen. I think that does not make any sense personally. We know that Jonah was a real character. In verse 1 of the book, he is called the son of Amittai, so he does have a father. He is a real person. He is also mentioned in Second Kings, almost said Second Corinthians, Second Kings chapter 14. He is also mentioned there. So it doesn't make sense to me how a historically true character of the Bible, Jonah, just has this fake story that's made up about him. That makes absolutely no sense, in my opinion.
Let me say that again. Parts of the Bible do not have to be factually true to be actually true. The story of Jonah, not factually true probably, but there's a story, but in there, there's wisdom about what happened.
There's absolutely nothing in the text that would indicate that the story of Jonah is not factually true. There's nothing there.
When we turn away from the path that God is calling us to. And I don't know about you, but I've ended up in the belly of a whale sometimes in my life. I found myself in situations where it looked like there was no way out. I couldn't believe I'm here. And the other good truth in that story is that the whale spit me up on the shore just like it did Jonah. That God provides a way out of impossible circumstances. Do you see how that works in that particular passage?
Again, that is not how the book of Jonah is used when Jesus interprets this text. He says that Jonah was a foreshadowing of him. Again, just as Jonah was swallowed by this fish for 3 days, so would Jesus be dead in the belly of the earth for 3 days. Jonah was a type of Christ that was seen in the Old Testament.
But when we're talking about the resurrection, I want to say that it's a bit different than those stories. For me personally, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus. I believe it's a literal historical event. I believe that a man was crucified on a Roman cross 2,000 years ago, that he was laid in a tomb, and that 3 days later that tomb was empty and that man walked out.
We're still missing the why. Why did this happen in the first place? Why did it need to happen?
Believe that actually historically happened. This wasn't a story told by a few friends and it ended there. No, the story of Jesus' resurrection, that a literal man walked out of a literal tomb, this was a story that when it was told, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people in the first century heard about it and witnessed it. The Gospel of Luke tells us that after Jesus rose from the dead, or Paul writes this actually, 500 people witnessed him at one time. The physical Jesus standing, resurrected from the tomb. The apostles believed that they saw the physical man Jesus come from the tomb. And they literally died to stand up for the fact that they believed that they saw this happen.
That's true.
If Jesus hadn't risen, the Roman government would have done everything in their power to disprove the disciples. Because the disciples were a threat to the Roman Empire. And if a man really walked out of a tomb, the man that they claimed was God was the actual king, don't you think that the Roman government, if that didn't happen, they would have tried to say, look, the disciples are lying, they're crazy. But they couldn't do that. They didn't do that. If this was just a story or a religious myth, the writer of the Gospel of Luke would not open his gospel with these words. This is what
the writer of the Gospel of Luke. We can pretty confidently say that Luke wrote his own gospel. I don't know why he doesn't assign authorship there.
He says, Luke chapter 1, many of us have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down from those who were the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. With this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you,
Dude on the front row couldn't take it anymore. He had to get up and go.
so that you might know certain things that you have been taught. The opening of the Gospel of Luke, the writer says he's compiling eyewitness accounts so that the reader of Luke might know that it is true. I think that if this was just meant to be a myth, the writer wouldn't go that far to say that this is an eyewitness account. I believe that Jesus rose from the dead also because you can literally walk to the place where historically the death and resurrection likely happened, and there's nobody there. I've been there. So the second part of this question, so the first part is, yes, I believe the resurrection happened, and I want to say you don't have to agree with me. But the second part of the question is,
You do have to agree, not with Brandon, with the Bible, the scriptures, that the resurrection did in fact happen. You do have to agree to that to be a Christian.
is it important to the Christian faith, or why is it important to the Christian faith?
Why? Why is it important?
The Apostle Paul tells us that if the resurrection of Jesus didn't happen, our faith is in vain. Why? Because
Brandon does not finish reading that verse in 1 Corinthians 15. Paul goes on to say that if Jesus was not resurrected, that our faith is in vain. And the last half of the verse says, and we are still in our sin. The S word that you will never hear in a progressive church or by a progressive pastor, sin. We are still in our sin if the resurrection did not take place. But let's see if he'll mention that later on.
the ultimate hope of the gospel is that death will not have the last word in our lives or in our world. If Jesus didn't rise again, then there is still ambiguity about what will happen to us when we die. The point of living a life modeled after Jesus is because we believe that through Jesus we can create a better world here and now. And ultimately, that world that we create, that God is creating in our midst, will exist for eternity. The Bible says that this world, this earth, this renewed earth, is where we will spend eternity.
Okay, not to get into too much eschatology here, but I think most groups would agree that we are not on the new earth, or as he is saying, the renewed earth. That has not yet happened yet. Also, the gospel is not social justice or social change, anything like that. The gospel is Jesus coming to redeem humanity on a cross. And by faith in him, we can be saved. But we'll keep going. We'll let Brandon further kind of explain and clarify what he's talking about here.
Eternity. If Jesus really rose again, we can have confidence that we will too. If Jesus didn't rise, like I said, we live in a bit of ambiguity. So if Jesus rose from the dead, we know that this hope that we long for is true. If he didn't, we have no reason to actually believe it. If he did rise, we can be confident that God will likewise raise us. So do I believe in the resurrection? Yes. Do I believe it's important for our faith? Yes. The difference about our church, however, versus the way other churches talk about the resurrection, is that we don't claim to know how the resurrection happened. Throughout history, Christians have disagreed and had different opinions on the how of the resurrection. Was it a physical body that walked out of the tomb?
Yes.
Was it a spirit that rose from the dead?
No.
Is the Christ that rose from the dead 2,000 years ago still alive in a physical body today?
Yes.
Or is he alive through the incarnation of the church?
No. Jesus ascended to the cross in Acts chapter, ascended to heaven in Acts chapter 1 and is now seated at the right hand of God. Did a spirit walk out of the tomb? No.
All of these are faithful possibilities. The accounts about the resurrection of Jesus are mysterious. If you read the Easter story, you have Jesus walking through walls. You have him appearing and disappearing in and out of rooms. But then you also have him sitting down on the beach and cooking fish and eating it. It seems like Jesus.
I assume the passage he is talking about here is Luke chapter 24, starting in verse 36. He doesn't list the passage, but in that account, we have the disciples together in a room, and all of a sudden, Jesus is in their midst. He just seems to appear out of thin air in the room among them. They are scared, and Jesus says, touch his hands, see that he is not a ghost or a spirit, that he has flesh. He also asked for something to eat in that same narrative, showing to them that he was a physical body, not just a spirit.
Had a physical body. And it seems like he didn't have a physical body. I don't know about you, but try walking through a wall in your physical body. Doesn't really work. Then the apostle.
I would just call that another miracle that we see performed by Christ, where there is a suspension of natural law and he does something that should not happen. People do not just appear in rooms. Also, 5,000 people are not just fed off of a couple fish and a couple loaves of bread. These are called miracles.
So Paul says that he experienced the resurrected Christ, but when he does so, it's a light in the sky that speaks to him.
Yes, Jesus had already ascended to the right hand of the Father in heaven, and he speaks to Saul on the road to Damascus, and he calls him to ministry.
So the how of the resurrection is up for grabs.
Not really.
And ultimately, I don't think it's very important.
It is very important.
Is Jesus in a physical body to this day? I don't know. All I know is this, that Christ is risen. That the disciples experienced something 2,000 years ago that changed their lives and has changed the world ever since. All I know is that when I call upon the name of this Christ, he responds. He transformed my life and is transforming the lives of billions of people. You don't need to know the how of the resurrection. We just need to know that God was faithful to raise Jesus, and God will be faithful to raise us.
We need to know the why of the resurrection.
And again, on these big questions, I want to say, again, you don't need to believe anything that I'm saying to be a part of this community.
But you do need to believe in the resurrection to be a part of the Christian faith.
Okay to see it differently. It's okay to be unsure. It's okay to have doubts and come to a different conclusion. But as for me, this is where I stand on this particular question. Cool.
It seems to me that just progressive pastors are just as dogmatic about not knowing the truth as most conservative Protestants are about knowing the truth and making truth claims. But I do want to say here today, you can know the truth by reading the scriptures, that Jesus came down from heaven, took on flesh, lived a sinless life, died on a cross for the sins of humanity to redeem humanity from the curse of the law, from being under the law. He took that upon himself on our behalf, and now we are made righteous by faith in him. That is the why it happened, how it happened. The physical Jesus was raised from the dead, just as we will be physically raised in the last days as well at the second coming of Christ. I just want to thank you for tuning in today to this response video. I pray that you continue to look at some more of our content on the channel and to help the word get out. Until next time.